Her bio describes her as an activation and ascension guide, incorporating all things astrology into her business. I'm so excited to have Katherine on my show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks.
So tell us, how did you get into incorporating astrology into your business?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I always tell people this is like such a loaded question because astrology has been a part of my life since I was 7 years old. I was an avid reader. Like my mom took me to the books. It was like 50 cents for a used book, and it was the highlight of my life. And I got a book on the Greek gods and goddesses, and I was just like obsessed with it. Like I've remembered my past lives my whole life and everything too. So I was like so connected to it. And it was wild because basically I was reading like American Girl magazine or, something like that,
Mhm.
that had horoscopes. And I remember reading the word Venus and I was like, oh, Venus, like I know Venus, that's
Mhm.
Aphrodite. And so I was like, wait, what is this stuff? And I just got really into it. But the real that I sort of stuck with it and even at that young age became known for it was because I had a crush on a boy and I wanted to know if we were compatible. So I always tell people like that's a real reason I got into it and it wasn't just a passing thing. He's still my best guy friend to this day, like great person. But yeah, my little Libra moon was like, gotta know. And it's really funny because even the way that I coach with astrology for business or for wealth is really applying synastry mostly. And that has to do with who we attract into our lives and why, like relationship astrology. So it's kind of funny going all the way back how that was like the root of everything all along?
I love that. As you were talking, I was thinking about how like J14 used to have those mini horoscope sections and how 17 would have the
Yes.
mini horoscope sections. And I was like, yes,
Yes.
we were all 14 looking at the magazines and saying, oh,
Mhm.
Scorpio boy, not for me.
Right. Like, oh my God, no, I'm an Aries. I could never be with a Pisces.
What's my luck for today? And so as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, it also toggled my own memory because I feel like astrology has come to the mainstream just feel like in the last decade, but astrology's been right in front of us for so long. And it's something that's starting
Right.
to be really conceptualized um, as something that can be applied to every day. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's kind of even how I got into really using it in business too, because I had done it for so long for fun and I was a professional actor. So this is like the kind of thing I was doing, backstage or behind the scenes just for fun for my friends. A traumatic event that essentially just led me to a place of healing and being in therapy and everything. And it was like right around the time when astrology started becoming really, really popular, like more so mainstream pop culture wise. And especially like coaches were using it and, that kind of thing. So I had my first business at the time and I worked with someone doing business astrology actually. And not the kind that I practice today. I actually like don't really agree with what she taught and never really did, but I just kind of liked her vibe. But yeah, like it was so interesting because I felt like for so long it had been something that people had put me down for or something I had to hide or something that was delegitimized. And then all of a sudden everybody was like, "Oh my God, like can you tell me more about my astrology? Can you read my chart?" And
Yeah.
it really really took off and yeah, now I feel like it's definitely a part of our day to day for
Yeah.
most of us.
How did you combat the negativity or the pushback that you were getting around investing into astrology? How did you allow yourself to say, actually, this feels most aligned and this is what I want to do?
Well, I think for the longest time, it was something that I just did, again, like behind the scenes. It was just something that I just considered to be sort of a pastime of mine because I'm a manifesting generator in human design too. Like I'm an Aries sun. I just have that energy where I get bored quickly and I like to learn about all kinds of things too. I'm a Virgo IC also. So I was just kind of like a bookworm when I was younger. And I just like loved to learn. I was like that nerdy girl who just loved to learn of learning, right? For the longest time, it was just my thing that I did for myself. As time went on, it really became my business. We were in that shifting stage where it
Mm-hmm.
went being something people joked about to being something people took really seriously. It was 50-50, depending on who I was meeting. If people, quote unquote, believed in it, you can't really believe or not believe in astrology. It doesn't work that way. It's not
Yeah.
like Santa Claus. It was interesting because I'm someone who really prides herself on doing a lot of research and being very academically minded and focused. And so it was kind of strange to have people saying, like, well, you're so smart. Why are you engaging with this when astrology takes a brilliant mind to decode? I mean, and just a lot of different qualities go into being an astrologer that I don't think people really actively think about because it's such a complex system. And it's not just as simple as, facts and research. There's also interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the communication aspect of how do I tell a client about this in a way that they can comprehend. So I really say we're kind of more like language interpreters. It's like someone listening to Spanish and only knowing like hola me amo,
Mm-hmm.
and not knowing a whole sentence. And it's like, okay, if you go and DIY it yourself, you can, of course, if you actually want to study it, but it's easier just to hire someone to say, hey, what is this person saying? So I think as I talked to people more about it in that way, people that were maybe a little bit more skeptical really actually became my number one fans.
I love that. And I also love that you mentioned the fact that astrology is like so much more than knowledge retention. Like it's so much more than knowing the sign, knowing the information, to
Yes.
apply it and to be able to explain it to different people, to explain conjunct points, to explain so much that I could describe right now for people to
Yeah.
explore it. It's really a craft, like, and it truly is a language that someone is interpreting, that someone is describing to someone.
100%. Yeah, there's so much that goes behind even giving like a simple astrological explanation. If you tell me, oh, I have Venus and Aries in the 10th house conjunct my sun, that's multiple conversations going on all at once. That I always say it's like the building blocks of astrology are like sign, house, aspect, planet, right? And so if you put all of those pieces together, then you get the full picture, you get the full story. And that kind of is where people start, right? Knowing those archetypal
Mhm.
energies and piecing it together. But then when you're doing it as long as I've been doing it, because now it's been over, 20 years, it's been like 23 years, you really start to, yeah, like weave it into poetry almost, you
Mhm.
know? I'm in my Saturn return right now, and it's Saturn in Pisces. And one of the gifts of my Saturn return has been seeing how valuable it is that I've been doing astrology for this long, because when you do it for this long, it becomes much more flowing. Like it's a little bit more staccato when you start, because it's just like fact, 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 plus
Mhm.
this equals this. But yeah, as you go along, you're like, oh, there's these beautiful stories being woven and these beautiful archetypes that show up in people's lives. And
Mhm.
it's always such a reminder for me, like it's not just the archetype, people are actually living this. Someone is actually living with that Taurus energy or Capricorn or whatever. And so it just helps develop that empathy too. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a really critical value and quality to have when you're an astrologer.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned human design, and I've had a couple people just explain human design on the show. How is astrology different from human design?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I coach both. I found human design before it was popular. So when people were like, what is this alien language? And so I've been doing that one for quite a few years too. I want to say it's been like six or 7 years now. but I always say that like astrology is the love of my life and human design is kind of like my side chick, you know? Not that I believe in that kind of structure. But human design is really helpful in its own right. You know, human design helped me unlock things that even after doing astrology for so many years, I hadn't quite tapped into. I like to say that human design, the really nice piece about human design is astrology is a part of human design. So if you know astrology and you're learning human design, you already have that leg up.
Mm.
But it's really interesting because I come across a lot of clients that human design is just easier for them to understand than astrology, which always kind of blows my mind because human design is like so much more to remember. But some people's brains just think in that way. But I think the difference between the two is that human design is really about tapping into, okay, what is my strategy? What is my authority? And then like beat to beat, moment to moment, listening to your own body, right? Versus astrology, there's definitely ways that we can talk about that. And there's definitely things in astrology that show strategies for doing so. Or, and again, it's always things that you're already intuitively doing, but it's just
Mhm.
bringing those things that might be more unconscious to the conscious. Right. But I think that that's where human design really thrives. And I think where it's really helpful is in decision making and in that moment to moment aspect of like, do I want this? Yes or no? Was that me waiting for the invitation? Like, did I wait that full lunar cycle to decide on this really big decision? Right? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking it sounds like you truly like follow the divine path that has been laid out for you. Like you describe astrology, the way you describe human design, it's something that has always been with you and you just allowed it to take its course even as you explored other avenues. It's something you always came back to.
For me personally,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think it's like they're my languages, it's how I speak now, especially doing it professionally. But even before, I would just throw into a conversation like, oh my God, that was such a Libra moon thing for me to say. And people be like, what does that even mean? But again, it's like speaking shorthand, and I really think that it is the conversation of the universe. Like I said, I've channeled and seen energy and been psychic and had dreams and everything my whole life. And so over time, I've been introduced to all kinds of theologies and modalities and whatever. And the reason I like astrology particularly, but human design encompasses it in its own right in certain ways, but especially astrology, is that astrology really is the umbrella for everything.
Hmm.
If we're talking about breath work, if we're talking about psychedelics, if we're talking about feng shui, whatever, I can see in someone's chart or I can see in the transits where people might be drawn towards certain things using astrology. So that's why I always lean on that one because it really encompasses everything. And I've tried everything under the sun at this point, or at least spoken to people about it. And from my experience, astrology is the one that it's like, yeah, if you want to know about that thing, that's in your chart. If you want to know about the government, you can look that up in the astrology. If you want to know about your health, also in your astrology. So, yeah, astrology answers every single question possible, honestly.
And I love that you discuss the breathwork aspect of it because astrology can truly be an alternative form of healing. Like it
Mhm.
can allow us to unlock and explore avenues that are truly more aligned instead of going against the grain and then going through life wondering why we're experiencing resistance in these areas when we can literally just look at our chart.
Exactly. And that's why I say things like, breath work might be exactly the right thing for you. You might be a Gemini moon and you're like, oh my God, this changed my life. Versus someone who, say, I'm trying to think of someone who might not really jive with that nearly as much. I don't know, someone who's like a Scorpio or something, and they would rather do the shadow work, right? So it's like, and there's a time and place for everything because in our own charts, we hold all 12 energies.
Mhm.
We also have planets all over the place. So you're going to have a concentration of energy for yourself. But throughout your life, because of the way that things transit and progress, you really get to play with every single energy. You get to see what it's like to have a little bit more Gemini. You get to see what it's like to maybe look at the Pisces perspective, you know? And I think that that's like the really fun part about it. And again, where that empathy comes back in, because you really start to understand other people's perspectives or other people's motives. But yeah, it's very powerful to look at the chart and be like, oh, I get why feng shui is super helpful for you because you have a moon in the fourth house. So, of
Hmm.
course, that's going to emotionally regulate you and feel good to you to have really good energy in your space.
Yeah. How would you describe a stellium to somebody?
That's a great question. So stelliums and astrologers kind of differ on opinions here. I personally think it's three, some think it's four, but it's three, four, or more planets in the same sign, often in the same house. Um, but basically it's just a concentration of energy. So I have stelliums in Pisces and also Scorpio. Yeah, and in my ninth and fifth house, respectively. So it really just means that, like, for me personally, I just have a little bit more Pisces or a little bit more Scorpio than like the average person. So I'm going to operate more so in those ways than I would like a different sign. So again, it kind of comes back to we're all like these beautiful little snowflakes that are so unique. Something that blows my mind as someone who again like has remembered her past lives and sees other people past lives and everything her whole life is that even in this life, like we only have our one chart, you know, and you go through evolutions with the transits and progressions,
Mhm.
but that one natal chart is like your snowflake, you know,
Mm.
nowhere in the history of the world ever has someone had your exact birth chart unless they were born literally at the exact same time in the exact same hospital, right? But
Oh,
it's like my mom and MC Hammer are pretty close. They were born the same day and around the same time, about 15 minutes apart from each other.
that's fun.
Yeah, but then you get like the synastry aspect of, you know, his mother and father have different astrology than my mom's mother and father. So that affected like their lives, but it's funny to see even just the parallels in their life and how they were dancing at the same time, or like when she had me, he was having a lot of career success. Just kind of interesting, but I digress. But yeah, stellium is just that collection of energy in that one specific sign. Not everybody has it, but if you do have it, it is important to know. And I think it is important to understand how to work with that sign's energy, especially if it's something like Scorpio, right? Which like my entire year had, because we have the Pluto North Node in Jupiter in Scorpio concentration.
Hmm. So I get a lot of mixed reactions from people with my chart that know astrology. So I have an Aquarius stellium in my ninth house.
I
In my
love
ninth
that.
house.
I love that.
What does that mean? Or what, I guess, for the audience, if someone were to see that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like I said, we kind of break it down bit by bit. So, we would just look at Aquarius as a sign first and foremost, right? There's that drive to be more unique, to be different. There's probably a humanitarian aspect, a progressive aspect, maybe even futuristic, right? I always say that Aquarius, I mean, I know a lot of people like to call them like little aliens and things, but it simply comes from this place of, you know, you're following your heart's desire and you're just doing what's right for
Mm.
you. And that comes across as different to
Hmm.
other people, right? Or unique to other people. So we look at Aquarius first, then we would look at every single planet and how those planets are interacting with each other. So just pretend it's like Mars and Saturn. We're going to look at Mars, which is about drive and motivation, forward momentum, even your sexuality. We're going to look at, what did I say, Saturn, which is about restriction. It's about discipline. It's about teaching you lessons. It's about mastering things. So then we're going to look at, okay, how far apart are those? Are those really closely interacting? Or, imagine it's a dinner party and they're sitting a few away from each other. So they can still converse, but they're maybe just not as chatty, right? As
Mhm.
two that are sitting right next to each other.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
yeah, yeah. So then we like would put all of those together, right? You go through every single planet, string them all together, look at the corresponding conversations, and then you look at the ninth house. So the ninth house is about getting outside of your comfort zone. It's about expansion. It's about moving beyond familiar territory. And then through that process, gaining like a life philosophy and belief, spiritual mastery, maybe even like thought leadership. So it would make sense that someone who has an Aquarius stellium, right, has a podcast, having that in the ninth house, because you're sharing these unique perspectives, right? You're venturing into new territory, having guests on talking about spiritual and conscious topics, right? Things
Mhm.
that are more futuristic or progressive, if you will. So yeah.
Totally tracks. Yeah. I have I have a lot of air in my chart. So Aquarius, stellium, ninth house, and then I'm a Gemini rising. And so I always say I will have all the
Love the
ideas
Gemini
in the
rising.
world. I want to change the world, and then having people around me that can like help me land the plane. That's
Yeah,
always valuable.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things about Aquarius that people don't quite understand is that Aquarius is sometimes so progressive and so futuristic that they're like, okay, listen, we're going to get all the aliens together. And then the robots are going to come in and people are going like, I just asked you to like unload the dishwasher. Like, what are you talking about? You're like, what if there was a device that unloaded the dishwasher? And so sometimes it's like so far ahead that you need kind of that Capricorn or Taurus or whatever, right? To kind of bring you back into, hey, this is reality now, but how do we use those visionary visions and
Hmm.
start to actually implement that and weave that into today's day to day, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't just like stay a vision. So it's kind of one of those fun ways that, again, like within synastry or whatever, right? We interact with each other. And I like to say we lend our codes to one another. So, like you said, you're really great at seeing the vision for flying the plane and flying the plane, but you need someone to help you land it.
What would you say to someone who wants to learn astrology? What would their first step be?
Understand the signs. Understand, I was literally just had a session with someone earlier because I do something called the Astrology Mentorship Program, where from newbies to more advanced students, I help people expand on their astrology knowledge and skills. And she came in like total newbie. So we start again with the basics. And I was like, I'm not going to teach this the way I think a lot of astrologers would, which is valid in its own right. But I think it's less helpful if you want to start reading charts and actually helping people with this. So I said, so I'm not just going to give you a list of traits about the sign and be like, okay, memorize. This is what Aries is about. This is what Gemini is about, right? I said, I really want to talk through archetypally what every single sign means and why there are these reputations for every single sign. And like when, people say, oh, they're aggressive, they must be an Aries, right? Like,
Hmm.
why does that come up? Where within the Aries does that drive come from? Or why would they come across aggressive? Or who would they come across aggressive with? That's what I always recommend to people is to really understand archetypally every single sign, not just the pop astrology, but to truly understand what body parts does that sign rule. Like
Hmm.
these rules the head, right? So if we're thinking about the connection to the head and we're thinking about the connection to the eyes and the brain, right? What does that mean? If we're thinking of Aries' phrase is I am, right? What does that mean in terms of this infant like archetype that's like me, but in a healthily selfish way that we all need, which is I need this, I want this, I
Hmm.
desire this.
Astrology is so much more than signs and traits and strengths and weaknesses. I mean, it's in everything.
It's literally like that's my joke is like I was saying to you before, everything can be explained by astrology. Everything can be traced back to astrology, like down to the colors people use in their homes, the kind of shapes that we gravitate towards, the kind of music that we like. All of it can be explained by astrology, and all of it is ruled and governed by people's astrology. So yeah, that's like my Roman Empire.
What's one misconception about Aries sun that you're always happy to debunk?
Well, I think the aggressive thing, the only times in my life that I've ever had to be aggressive was because I truly had to advocate for myself, and I truly felt like I am not being heard and you're not listening to me and I'm not getting what I want here. So I'm going to have to put down the hammer a little bit more, right?
Mm.
But you also, again, have to take in like, I'm a Libra moon, I have a Pisces Mars versus like my grandmother, she has more Aries in her chart than anyone I've ever seen before. Her entire freaking chart is Aries. And that woman is a powerhouse, like, my God, right? And again, it's like that assertiveness, it's that drive, it's that like fast moving, okay, let's go, let's get it, right? So again, I can see how that would come across as aggressive to certain people. And I can also see how other people who are on that same frequency and vibration would see that as, oh, she's assertive and she's independent and she's able to take care of herself, right? And she's self-sufficient.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest one for Aries.
And you speak to the energetic reception of signs. And so while some people may look at an Aries and say, oh my goodness, you're a lot, you're aggressive, you're very like all over the place, or,
Mhm.
just really intense. Another person could look at an Aries and say, you're so independent, self sufficient, a trailblazer. And that can be
Spicy.
a positive quality that somebody sees.
Yep. It's one of those funny things because who really likes me in dating is like water sign men, like especially like Cancer, Pisces. Like, I don't really like Pisces, but I love Cancer men. So I'll talk about them. And it's so funny because it's like they're always like, you're so like spicy. Like you add this like excitement and this energy to my life, So I think it's exactly that. It's that great quote where it's like, I may not be your cup of tea, but I'm someone's shot of whiskey, So it's like, you just have to be yourself. And the fire signs, especially, are always told that they're too much to tone it down, whatever. But we also need that get up and go for certain. That's obviously going to rule things like sports and athletics and
Mhm.
business, right? So we need it in certain avenues the same way we also need someone who is going to be able to hold a very quiet, peaceful, relaxing, tranquil space too.
Yeah, that's why there's four different, larger categories, because
Mhm.
there's balance, and that's why they all exist in our chart, because we need balance. We can't have all this fire or all this air. We need earth, or we need to surround ourselves with other people who have those areas in their chart that they can kind of balance out some that we don't have.
Yep, exactly. And that's why I'm like obsessed with synastry and especially using it for wealth and business too, especially like client attraction, because your chart literally shows you the kind of person who balances you, whether that's in a group or that's one to one. And I just think it's so helpful to know, like, oh, that's why I gravitate towards people that hold this kind of energy,
Mm.
or that's why I always feel better around my best friend who has a bunch of Taurus placements because I don't have any earth and it's grounding for me. So, yeah, it's one of those cool ways that we share our codes with each other.
Yeah. What is one piece of advice you want to give to them?
Okay, I have a few. So, for my folks that aren't quite in it, but they're kind of in what I like to call their pre Saturn return, there are two things that happen before your Saturn return that are really fundamental, I think, in terms of your development going into it, especially in terms of having a source of comfort zone and support before your Saturn return encourages you to go in a more mature direction. So that is the progressed moon return, which is where the progressed moon comes back to the same place that it was when you were born for the first time ever. So again, I'm a Libra moon, so mine returned back to Libra. And it's basically just like this reinstallment of your values,
Mm.
right? It's just this reminder of, oh, that's what makes me feel good. That's what makes me tick. It's why people say you really start to find yourself in your late 20s into your 30s. The astrology literally shows why, because it's all of these reminders of that's my energy, right? Like you're not just playing in the field that is something different or somebody else's, but you're coming back to your own natal energy in some really particular ways. So there's that. And then the second one is the nodal reversal, which is where the north node goes to your south node. And so this means that it's a time where you, again, are kind of reminded of your comfort zone. You're reminded of home base or your foundation, so to speak. I could talk for hours about the South Node and North Node, but all I'll say about this, if your people are into astrology, they should know this because some modern astrologers do teach this incorrectly and it can be really dangerous, is lean into your South Node because your North Node finds you, right? Versus like trying to lean into your North Node energy because that can just be a no-go zone. Don't do that. Trust me, I've been there. Don't do it. But this is a really great time of being reminded of, again, what comes easily, what comes naturally to you, what feels like home, what feels like the comfort zone, because it's been quite a few years since you had that transit too. The last time it happened was 18 years ago. So you were a kid when that comes around. That one, again, is really important for the same reason, because it's also a great time to stand as an authority in whatever it is that you do feel comfortable in, or is that home base for you, having now gained the knowledge of your north node to kind of balance it out, right? So for instance, mine is Taurus, my south node is Taurus, my north node is Scorpio. So when I went through my Scorpio north node return, I learned more about like, shadow work and the darkness and
Mm.
energy exchange. And with Taurus, my home base is like pleasure and play and almost hedonistic enjoyment of the world. And so, right before my Saturn return, the whole world through the North Node was getting introduced to more of that Taurus energy through like, follow me on my daily vlog as I go get my nails done and I drink my little matcha and I go to Pilates and whatever, right? And that's my home base. So it was this reminder of, oh, there's value in it and people want to hear that, And so all of that happens pre-Saturn return. So it's kind of like the warm up to the Saturn return. Then when you're in the Saturn return, I really think the best thing is to understand the archetypal energy of the sign that your Saturn is in. Because people who went through like Capricorn and Aquarius are going to have a much more difficult time than someone who's going through, like, say, Pisces, right? Someone who is going through Aries is going to have a completely different experience than someone who just went through Pisces. And again, not to put down other astrologers, but I think there's a lot of like pop astrologers on TikTok and stuff saying like, it's so hard, it sucks, da 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 da, right? But I think if you really understand the sign and you understand your own personal house placement, you can even kind of get ahead of it a little bit and you can really focus on, okay, what is Saturn going to try to teach me? And how can I continually lean into that,
Mm.
right? Like, how can I not shy away from that? Almost like taking an advanced course, like when
Yeah.
you're in college, taking something that you're like, okay, it's a little bit more challenging, but I'm going to rise to this occasion and I'm going to kill it and I'm going to get an A+ in that course.
Whew. Yeah. Interested to see how that goes for me. Catherine, this conversation was so valuable.
I'm so happy.
How can people find you if they are feeling moved to work with you?
Yeah, so it's really easy to find me because my name is the only name in the world.
Hmm?
No one else has my name. That's what I meant to say. It's Katherine, Katherine. Last name Wehler, Wehler. So if you just Google that, my website should pop up. But if you forget it, my website is katherinewehler.com. So pretty simple. And then on Instagram, Katherine_Wehler and Katherine Wehler everywhere else. And I have free courses that people can take to get started. I also have a free new paradigm wealth activation meditation too. So if you're a little bit more new to my world and you just kind of want to wet your feet, that's a great place to start.
Amazing. And I'll link her website and all of her information in the description. Catherine, this was great. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine. This was so fun.